Good evening, Bahamas. This is NB12 broadcasting from Cable 12 Studios on Robinson Road. Here's what's making news tonight. Laid off Wyndham workers take their protest to Parliament. A delay requested for the constitutional referendum. The government aiming to implement VAT tax by summer 2014. Plus, Bahamians get marked for Ash Wednesday. Those stories and much more on the way, and the Kia DeVoe and NB12 starts right now. Joining us here at NB12. Dozens of Bahamas Hotel Catering and Allied Workers Union members marched to Parliament Square this morning in protest of the termination of 140 people from the Wyndham Resort last week Friday. Union leaders demanded that the government intervene on behalf of those workers and didn't respond well when government officials said there is nothing that can be done to save those jobs. Paige McCartney reports.
Chinese working Bahamians home. This is wrong. This is wrong. This is wrong. This is wrong.
Carrying placards, chanting and singing, some of the laid-off Wyndham employees and hotel union members marched down Bay Street to Parliament Square just before the weekly sitting of the House of Assembly. The rowdy crowd greeted Prime Minister Perry Christie, shouting about their plight as they blocked him from entering Parliament. He spoke briefly with union leaders before heading inside. But before that, Labour Minister Shane Gibson said the only thing the government can do in response to this matter is amend the labour laws to prevent it from happening again. Gibson said it's unfortunate what happened to the Wyndham workers, particularly considering the concessions the government gave Bahamar. Nonetheless, he said the government's hands are tied.
Listen to me, I don't own Bahama. When you say give assurances, we can only do our jobs. Our job is to make sure we protect the workers through legislation and through any means possible legally, right? You don't want me to tell them something today to make them feel good and tomorrow I can't deliver on it. I don't own Bahama. I can give the assurance that we will be doing everything within our power to make sure that workers are not made redundant unreasonably, that we will have this matter investigated to see whether or not the redundancy is actually justified. And when you look at the ILO convention, it speaks specifically to making sure that discussions are held prior to redundancies to make sure that employers are able to justify redundancy, right? And so I can't do anything in terms of saying, I demand you put them back in the job, right? I don't think any government, any country can do that.
But the union leaders say the answers or the response from the government is not good enough. They say the government signed the agreement with Bahamar, and therefore they should ensure that workers are always protected.
The minister is doing his job. I will not be satisfied until the appropriate persons intervene and we get answers. I am not satisfied with something said to a camera that sounds right. At the end of the day, we need to secure the employment and possibilities for employment for Bahamians, all persons able to work in the Bahamas.
But the government said there's nothing it can do about it. So the government says there's nothing they can do about it.
See, if you sign a heads of agreement and it's unenforceable, then why sign it?
This matter is bigger than just the two Congresses. This matter is important to the Bahamian people, and that is what we need to understand, what is happening in this country with the unemployment, with persons just getting terminated on jobs. This affects the entire Bahamas.
Yes, I call upon Shane Gibson. I call upon the Minister of Tourism and whomever else. Stop talking. Stop talking. We are sick and tired of the rhetoric.
According to Gibson, even though the union's industrial agreement requires that the employer give workers advance notice on redundancies, the current industrial agreement was never registered with the Industrial Tribunal to make it effective. Because of that, Dave Beckford, who's running for Hotel Union president, said Nicole Martin is equally culpable in the matter.
I think that our leadership was not proactive and ensuring the future employment of those workers. And we have an agreement that was in place for 5 years. Ms. Martin had a responsibility to ensure that that agreement is registered, because if it's not registered, it's not enforceable, it's not legal. And she did not do it. Is the government responsible for making sure that the agreement is registered?
The industrial agreement wasn't registered since 2008. But we were living in the spirit of that agreement up until last week. And if the industrial agreement is not valid, is the heads of agreement also not valid? This is not just, and I am not going to let anyone reduce this to union and employer. The government is a part of this.
But Gibson said the laws have been changed to fix that problem.
We have since come into office, we have since amended the law to allow for the registration of industrial agreements by the registrar of trade unions rather than with the tribunal, because we saw the problems. We saw where about maybe 70 to 80% of the unions could not get the industrial agreements registered simply because the tribunal, for various reasons, did not register them. And so we've corrected that problem already.
In the meantime, it's the workers who have been most affected. They say they protested to have their voices heard.
We were all sold this dream that we're going to be a part of this project, that we're going to some academy or university to be trained properly. So I don't know who's looking out for our best interests. It looks like they're selling our land with a fancy dream of hotel work and big resort, and then they're pushing us off the land.
Yes, I was laid off, and I would like all of my money for the 17 years Please give me my money, what I deserve. You understand? Because it's easy.
Because the agreement has been breached, that any day the employer can come and send the few that are there at home. All of our livelihoods and our jobs are at stake.
Prime Minister Christie met with the Hotel Union president this morning after the House adjourned. He informed her of his expected meeting with Baha Mar CEO Sarkis Ismerlian on Friday. Martin met with union members at Workers' House afterwards to give them a briefing. For MB12, I'm Paige McCartney.
Well, speaking to reporters after the protest, the Prime Minister said it is essential to determine the future of the multi-billion-dollar development and its relationship with the government of the Bahamas.
In recent times, you've heard me indicating that I want to, together with Mr. Ismerlian, find common ground for the kind of relationship we ought to have, given the significance of that development to the future of our country. And we need to make a very special effort to avoid the kind of surprises to the government of the Bahamas, and really, for that matter, the people who work for him, that came about as a result of those layoffs.
The Prime Minister has granted an extension to the Constitutional Reform Committee to turn in its report on suggestions to amend the Constitution ahead of the referendum. What that means is that the date for the referendum has also been pushed back to the end of the year. Prime Minister Christie read a communication in the House of Assembly stating the reasons for the delay put the high public interest into consideration and the need to allow more time for public consultation and enough time for the electorate to properly consider the proposed changes before voting. The new deadline is June 30th, with the referendum pegged to be held in late November.
These extensions will both encourage and facilitate the widest possible dialogue and public education on constitutional reform well in advance of any voting in a referendum. It should be noted, Mr. Speaker, that this weekend past, the Commission launched its town hall-style public consultations with 4 separate meetings in Grand Bahama. These consultations will extend throughout the Family Islands and New Providence in the coming months.
Well, the Prime Minister also tabling the white paper for the tax reform in the House this afternoon. It proposes the implementation of value-added tax at a rate of 15% by July 2014. Today, Minister of State for Finance Michael Halkitis explained what the government's objectives are and what we can expect over the next 16 months. According to the Prime Minister, the objectives of the tax reform proposals are threefold: to secure an adequate revenue base in support of modern governance, to establish a tax structure that promotes economic efficiency and stronger economic growth, and to make the tax system more equitable. Halkitis told NB12 today the rate of 15% was chosen after benchmarking similar jurisdictions, and that rate would ensure that government will have access to adequate revenue streams in the future. But nothing is set in stone, and the government could decrease or increase the amount. The final amount will be based on feedback from the public, particularly businesses and consumer groups.
We inform the public, we inform business people, those who have to administer it. We need to make sure that we put in place the proper administration of it by, making sure we have proper people in place. We need to make sure that we have the legislation drafted. We need to make sure that we have the proper IT, information technology platform, put in place.
Halkitis also revealed that the government is proposing some businesses be exempt from VAT.
What we have is we're proposing that businesses with annual turnover of 50,000 or less are exempt. And if you do that, you end up with about 3,200 businesses that would be registered. Those are from the last numbers that we had. We think that number is manageable in terms of administration. We should be able to administer that if you put in place a proper system.
Addressing members of the Bahamas Chamber of Commerce today during a special luncheon at the British Colonial Hilton, Halkitis added that for competitive reasons, it is also proposed to eliminate the hotel occupancy tax and to subject hotel accommodations to VAT rather than subject them to both taxes. However, hotels would have a VAT rate of 10% and food and beverage sales in hotels also would be subject to 10%.
This will allow hotels to claim VAT input credits on their purchases of materials and supplies and will be consistent with the current hotels encouragement regime. Hotels will benefit from lower compliance costs and the government will benefit from administrative economies of scale.
And when asked if the government could pull off the restructuring of the country's tax system in such a short time, Halkitis said it is an attainable goal, especially considering that the government has already gotten the ball rolling.
We have done a lot of work on it already. So we think it's a timetable that can be achieved. In most cases, you hear about a timetable of about 2 years, 18 months to 2 years. We think that by virtue of the fact that a lot of work has already been done, we can get it done to be ready for implementation July 1st, 2014.
The government will be distributing several thousand copies of the proposals. They will also be available online at the government's website. Halkitis encourages all Bahamians to review the proposals and offer feedback, stating that the implementation date will depend on the government's cooperation.